crash on Bell Road just off the parking lot property when persons ran to them and said there was an individual in the theater with a gun and with a hatchet. Those officers ran to the scene as we were also getting a phone call at that point, apparently, of an active gunman shooter inside the theater. One of the South Precinct officers immediately entered the theater. He encountered the gunman as he entered the theater that was showing a film of Mad Max. The gunman, the suspect, raised his weapon toward that officer, pulled the trigger. That officer then fired on the suspect and then backed away from the theater. About that time, a Metro Police sergeant was arriving outside, and that sergeant encountered 3 citizens, 1 man and 2 women. The man had a superficial injury, a cut to his shoulder, evidently having been hit by the hatchet. The 2 women had been doused with chemical spray by the suspect. Their faces were blasted with pepper spray. Back to the inside the theater of Mad Max. The gunman apparently unleashed this pepper spray throughout the theater. As additional officers, the SWAT team entered that theater, it was very thick with chemical spray with irritant. Gas masks were brought in to those officers as they attempted to get this person into custody. Other officers had set up at the back of the theater. Ultimately, the suspect, who is, I am told, was wearing a surgical mask, came out of the back door of the theater. Metro Police officers at the back of the theater, of this Mad Max theater outside, engaged him. He was shot, fatally wounded, and has been pronounced deceased here at the scene. This person has been tentatively identified as a 51-year-old local man. His identity has not been confirmed. We are working to do that now. The actions of that first officer who went in the theater to engage this individual may well have saved multiple individuals inside that theater as officers work to evacuate everyone in here. Obviously, this is an 8-plex. There are 8 theaters here. He remained confined, we believe, to that Mad Max theater. After that first officer encountered him, that suspect remained inside the Mad Max showing and didn't go elsewhere. He was wearing a backpack on the front, on his chest. The bomb squad, our hazardous devices unit, is still working on clearing the materials that he had with him. We know he had a gun, which we have not examined at this point. We know that he had a something between a hatchet and an axe, and then this backpack on the front of himself, wearing a surgical mask. The mask may have been to try to negate the effects of the chemical spray that he'd brought with him.
Was anybody shot inside the theater at all?
The only person who was shot was the suspect as he emerged out the rear door of that single movie theater.
Did your officers happen to say if the suspect said anything to police, said anything to anybody in the theater, the witnesses, anything?
Not that I'm aware of at this juncture.
What are we looking at right now that the suspect had with him? We understand that the bomb squad is also on scene looking at packages of some kind.
Well, he had the backpack on his chest, wearing a backpack on his front, and he also had some other backpack or satchel with him. We're clearing those just to make sure that there's nothing inside them.
Can you explain, Don, about the pepper spray? Did he have canisters of pepper spray and was just openly spraying people? How was that? What happened?
Witnesses who were in the theater at the time have been taken to a location very nearby here at this mall and are being interviewed. I don't have a report yet of his actions with them when the citizens first encountered him. I do know that when the sergeant first came up on the scene, these 3 persons, the man and the 2 women, were coming out. The man with the superficial wound, we believe, from the axe, and then the 2 women who'd been doused in the face with this chemical spray.
Obviously, this police officer.
Say again? The call to the police department was about 1:13, and officers were engaging that very, very quickly, within 2 minutes. And then I don't have a precise time as to when he came out of the theater, But suffice it to say, the police response was swift, and this man was contained in this theater despite the pepper spray going off and everything else until he ultimately emerged out the back door.
This police officer was obviously extremely brave. This is an example of really just a high-class officer. Talk about how he's doing right now.
Well, you know, like this, police officers will tell you that their training kicks in. The Metro Police Department is highly trained in active shooter situations. We have trained on it actually at the old Bellevue Mall here in the city. Officers know what to do in these situations, and this officer let his training kick in. Obviously, his training was very effective in it.
Don, do you know when this gentleman came into the theater today? Did he say anything to the tellers? Did he give any type of indication that he was a troubled individual, anything like that?
We are still putting that scenario together. I don't know what he may have said, if anything, here in the theater. We have a report that he, before he came to the theater, was somewhere else in a public place in this area and may have uttered something. We're still confirming that now.
John, do we know if he purchased a ticket?
I do not. I do not.
Obviously, that officer had shot at him. Do we know how badly wounded he might have been before he tried to escape?
I do not.
He was the first supervisor here, and he encountered them just outside.
He's white.
We also were told that a witness at the...
When the officer encountered him, we believe that he was the only one in there at that present time, although I must say the officers did not know that. The officer who encountered him first went up to the projection room and then tried to work his way down and ultimately came to a level where he encountered the gunman. And then when the SWAT team got in, the room was full of this chemical irritant. It was somewhat cloudy in there. The entire theater has been cleared. There is no one with any substantive injury other than the suspect who was fatally wounded by Metro police officers.
Don, to back up really quick, I wanted to ask, did they, when they were in the theater, he started spraying with the pepper, did the individuals flee the theater at that point? Do you know?
That is my supposition, yes. Because when the sergeant arrived, he was one of the first ones here. There were two officers here before him, but he was the first supervisor here, and he encountered them just outside.
Don, is it possible that the three people who were seen leaving by those, were the only patrons in there watching the movie at the time?
This particular film, I don't know. Again,
That's what I meant in this theater.
Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. Again, the witnesses are going to be giving statements at another location, and they're doing that as we speak right now.
You're correct.
Are these witnesses?
And again, that 20 is preliminary.
When this all started, police officers were working a crash just off on Bell Road, just off movie theater property. Persons ran to those officers to report a man with a gun and an axe, and then I think there was also a phone call about that time as well.
So just to back up real quick, the officer went inside the theater by himself. That's where he encountered the gunman, was inside the theater.
You're correct.
Theater.
You're correct.
So this whole encounter happened inside that theater.
You're correct.
And we don't know how many people were in the theater at the time.
At this point, I do not.
How many witnesses have you moved to another location to interview?
Well,
approximately.
There could have been, by one account, again, this is very preliminary, there could have been as many as 20 folks in this complex at the time. We have a number of witnesses who have been taken to a private facility here on the same property to be interviewed. I haven't been there at this point, so I don't know how many actually are there giving statements. You're correct. You're correct. You're correct. And again, that 20 is preliminary. It could go up or down. That's just an initial estimate. Brian Haas is here with the Metro Fire Department. He can talk to you about what injuries to citizens that they saw.
Thanks, Don. My name is Brian Haas, Public Information Officer for the Nashville Fire Department. We responded along with police here to a call of an active shooter. Fortunately, after at least 2 or 3 searches at this point, we've only been required to treat 3 patients. The first patient was a 58-year-old male. All 3 patients had been sprayed with some sort of irritant, which we believe was a pepper spray sprayed by the assailant. The 58-year-old male also suffered from what was described as a superficial wound to his shoulder or arm from what may be a hatchet. And then there were 2 women as well, a 53-year-old woman and a 17-year-old woman who were also treated for exposure to pepper spray. At this point, they have been treated, they've been released. I assume they're going to be speaking to police about their experiences and what they saw. We're very, very grateful that we only have 3 pepper spray exposure cases to treat at this point. This could have been a lot worse, and we're extraordinarily pleased that the police response was so effective and quick on this. At this point, we're going to stay on scene as long as it takes until the police deem it safe. The bomb squad has done what they need to do. But at this point, there are no transports, and all the patients that we treated, we believe we've treated at this point.
Brian, can you elaborate about the...
As the hazardous devices unit has examined the backpack that the suspect was wearing, they are not comfortable with what they are seeing. So in a short amount of time, that backpack will be detonated by the bomb squad. They have certain procedures that we'll use, so there will be a loud bang here in a short period of time as the bomb squad works to ensure that this backpack that he was wearing is indeed safe. There's also another bag satchel on the inside that the bomb squad, the hazardous devices unit, is also going to have to deal with. But in short order, you're going to hear an announcement about a noise that's going to take place that should not alarm you. The noise will be the bomb squad using its methods to render safe this backpack that the suspect was wearing.
Can you talk about when you said they feel uncomfortable? What are they saying?
That's all I want to describe for it at this moment, is that the bomb squad has done their cursory examination. They're not comfortable with this laying there, so they are going to disrupt it. They're going to render it safe. You'll hear an announcement over a PA. There'll be a noise. That should not concern you. That's what the noise is going to be.
This is the bag that was on the ground, or the bag he was carrying? Which of the
It's my understanding that it is the bag that he had on him when he came out. It's at the back of the theater.
Tom, what would you like to say to the public who knows about a shooting in Louisiana at a movie theater? Now we've got this incident. Should people be worried when they go to movies tonight?
Well, I think Nashvillians should know that they have a very brave police department, trained police department, who came into this situation knowing what to do. Their training kicked in. They were here within a minute or two of this initial report. This guy was confined to one place, and as he came out of the theater, emerged from the theater, the officers engaged him, and he was fatally wounded. The threat at this theater is over as far as an active individual will now deal with the bags or satchels that he brought with him.
When they detonate this bomb, how much damage could be done? The bag, when they detonate this, what could the damage be to that area? I mean, is this something that would shut down this theater in terms of the back there?
No, the hazardous devices unit has certain procedures that it uses to render a satchel safe, to render, to disrupt something, just to make sure that it doesn't pose any harm, doesn't pose any risk. That's what they're going to be using. But there will be a loud bang when that happens.
How much longer will the theater be closed? And what other area, restaurants and things like that, will be closed for how long exactly?
I don't know. I don't know. Obviously, there was a significant discharge of chemical irritant, chemical spray inside the theater. I don't know what that is at this moment, or how long it will take to dissipate, or that type of thing. Obviously, there's also a satchel still inside the place that needs to be addressed. So I can't answer your question to a specific time.
Thank you, Don.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks. That was Don Aaron right there talking with us after.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Don Aaron. The headline from the latest press briefing is that this is the work of a 51-year-old local man, a white man from here in Nashville. He went into the theater, apparently with pepper spray, sprayed not only 3 people with it, but sprayed the entire room. Don Aaron described it as a noxious cloud in there.
Right.
And when a police officer came in, assessed it from the screening area, saw this man, they traded one shot. Then he got out the back door, apparently, with, this is strange, a surgical mask over his face. He apparently knew that he was going to spray this pepper spray or irritant and was prepared for that. Right now, the focus is on the backpack he had on his chest. Police will only say that they're uncomfortable with that bag, and they will put it into usually a closed box, and the bomb squad deals with these things to render safe, as the police say. They aren't going to say it's a bomb. They aren't going to say we're going to explode it. They render whatever in that bag to no longer be a danger.
Right. And they're going to warn everybody who's on scene there that they're going to hear a loud noise, and that will be exactly what's happening there. One of the things we need to point out here, for those of you who are just joining us and hearing about this shooting at the Carmike 8 Theater there in Antioch in the Hickory Hollow area, officers were working a crash scene just a short distance away on Bell Road when people who were in that theater came to the officers asking for help and saying there was a gunman inside and a guy armed with a hatchet. And those officers ran on foot to that complex and then entered the building as Don individuals.
And they were there within minutes. I mean, when they were right across the street and able to run in. The 3 people that were injured, we now know the man was 58 years old. He was the person also bruised by this hatchet or axe. He was with a 53-year-old woman and a 17-year-old woman. Those two had were squirted with this irritant or pepper spray in their face, and they were fortunately able to get out of the theater before any of this, we presume before the shots were fired.
Exactly.
Between the assailant or the gunman and that initial South Precinct officer, and then eventually and ultimately with the SWAT team.
Channel 4's Carly Gordon is live for us right now to give us an update from her vantage point. Carly?
Right, well, Tom, what you've heard people and police talk about so far are 2 backpacks that this shooter brought with him into the theater. And you just heard recently Metro spokesperson Don Aaron saying that authorities are uncomfortable with one of the bags. Well, TEMA works to let emergency officials across the state know what's going on, as well as the governor, folks like that. And so they have sent out a warning saying that a backpack with explosives on scene and specialty teams are addressing. So far all we've heard from Metro Police is that they are uncomfortable with what they're seeing in the backpack, but TEMA is reporting backpack with explosives on scene and specialty teams are addressing. Now, you just heard Don Aaron say that they are planning to detonate the backpack, and we do expect to hear a loud boom. We will work to get more information. We did just see a couple of fire trucks, extra fire trucks pull up, but again, TEMA reporting that backpack with explosives on scene. So we'll see what we can find out. Back to you.
All right. Stand by and keep us posted, especially when you hear that sound, Carly. Interesting that Metro Police train for this very sort of situation. Spokesman Don Aaron say, in fact, they used the old abandoned Bellevue Mall recently to train for something just like this. So they knew what to do. This initial South Precinct officer definitely knew what to do, and the other 2 that responded. And it was a swift and decisive response.
Well, yeah, when you heard Don Aaron recap what happened, think about this. I mean, this is kind of a confluence of events that you rarely see. You had officers who were nearby who were basically summoned to the scene by bystanders who were in that theater or at the movie theater saying, hey, you got to go in here. There's some guy who's armed with a gun and a hatchet inside. They got there so quickly, they got there before the 911 call actually got made to Metro PD. So, yes, when you think about it, this could have been a whole lot worse because the officers were there in a flash.
And you've got to wonder how much of this pepper spray, many people have this as a personal safety device, and it lets off a stream, and of course it could probably spread through the room. But Don described it as the entire theater, the air was thick with this irritant. So it's possible that this, individual had more than one canister, more than what the average person would be able to buy of this pepper spray or irritant that can stop people in their tracks. Police use it, in fact, as a weapon.
Sure they do. They absolutely do. And if you're wondering what it was like when all this went down about 1:15, 1:13 this afternoon, let's listen in to what one witness told us.
He told us to go. We were trying to go get something to eat, and we seen that the roads were closed, and we came over here to park, and everybody just started coming and parking just to see what was happening. And out of nowhere, we just seen the cops, and all the cops running towards the back, and they just started like a shootout. I guess they shot at the guy, and the guy shot shot back. So that's basically what happened. And then they told us to move back because there was bullets coming by or something like that. So we just ran back that way.
Wow, you just saw that cell phone. Someone was showing our camera cell phone video that they'd recorded. You could hear the gunshots on that cell phone video as people were scrambling away from the fire.
And Alana Otler earlier reported that people said anywhere between 30 seconds to perhaps 3 minutes full of a barrage of gunfire. Imagine what that sounded like.
Oh, my goodness. Well, again, for those of you just joining us, the gunman is dead in this movie theater shootout. Police engaged him inside. It moved outside. This guy was wearing a surgical mask. The movie where this happened was Mad Max, and this all happened about 1:15 today.
We don't know the person's name. We do know, however, this is a local Nashville man, a 51-year-old white man wearing that surgical mask, at least once he got into the theater, had a backpack on his chest, and the focus right now is that backpack. What was in it? Police are uncomfortable with what was inside. That's all we know. Although TEMA, the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency, is reporting that the backpack was loaded with some sort of explosives. So the next step that is happening out here in Antioch will be to neutralize or disarm and detonate that backpack, put it in a safe place, and do what bomb squads do to make this pack no longer a threat.
Let's go back to Don Aaron, Metro Police spokesperson, to get a feel for what we know right now. This was just a couple minutes ago.
There were actually 2 police officers working a crash on Bell Road just off the parking lot property when persons ran to them and said there was an individual in the theater with a gun and with a hatchet. Those officers ran to the scene as we were also getting a phone call at that point, apparently, of an active gunman shooter inside the theater. One of the South Precinct officers immediately entered the theater. He encountered the gunman as he entered the theater that was showing a film of Mad Max. The gunman, the suspect, raised his weapon toward that officer, pulled the trigger. That officer then fired on the suspect and then backed away from the theater. About that time, a Metro Police sergeant was arriving outside, and that sergeant encountered 3 citizens, 1 man and 2 women. The man had a superficial injury, a cut to his shoulder, evidently having been hit by the hatchet. The 2 women had been doused with chemical spray by the suspect. Their faces were blasted with pepper spray. Back to inside the theater of Mad Max. The gunman apparently unleashed this pepper spray throughout the theater. As additional officers, the SWAT team, entered that theater, it was very thick with chemical spray with irritant. Gas masks were brought in to those officers as they attempted to get this person into custody. Other officers had set up at the back of the theater. Ultimately, the suspect, who is, I am told, was wearing a surgical mask, came out of the back door of the theater. Metro Police officers at the back of the theater, of this Mad Max theater outside, engaged him. He was shot, fatally wounded, and has been pronounced deceased here at the scene. This person has been tentatively identified as a 51-year-old local man. His identity has not been confirmed. We are working to do that now.
That was the statement just a few minutes ago from Metro Police spokesman Don Aaron. Again, the 51-year-old man unleashed pepper spray or some sort of chemical spray inside the theater. Remember, theaters are dark, even in the middle of the day. Police had to use gas masks to get into that theater, that screening theater, to make sure that there was no one else perhaps hiding inside. 20 people or so were in the complex itself at the time. Not 20 people in that theater, but 20 people all together in the 8-plex. 3, we know for sure, were in the screening of Mad Max where this happened. Those 3 people were hurt. A 58-year-old man hit by this hatchet or axe in the shoulder, although the wound was described as superficial, and a 53-year-old woman and 17-year-old woman blasted, as Don said, with pepper spray to the face, and that can certainly hurt and disable a person.
And as we've mentioned too, there is a second satchel, as Don Aaron mentioned, that they're also going to be turning their attention to, that this person brought with him to the movie theater. They're going to have to figure out what's in that and whether or not it's deemed dangerous or not. I've been doing a little bit of research here. This person was wearing a surgical mask, and this could be completely coincidental, but he was in the movie Mad Max, and one of the characters, the main characters in that Mad Max movie, wore a respirator type.
Really?
Yes, they did. So we don't know if that has anything to do with this at all, but
or whether he was just preparing for what he knew he was going to do. Right. Also interesting, Metro Police actually train for these sorts of situations, and they used the old vacant Bellevue Mall recently to train for something just like this. It's amazing that in a split second, in an instant, officers can recall exactly what it is they are supposed to do, and they certainly did it properly and quickly this afternoon. Something's happening right now.
Yeah, we understand that the backpack is about to be detonated, neutralized, so to speak. We do see a crowd of people who just made their way to the police line right now. We're just kind of standing by like they are, waiting for that to happen. The police have to do that just to make sure that there's no explosive that could potentially injure someone in that backpack.
Right, and there will be an announcement. They'll go on a bullhorn or a public address system to warn people that what they're about to hear